Yeah, thank you. And hopefully the title, What is the Stimulus, will become clearer as we go on through this talk. So yeah, I'm going to present our work on implementing this associative learning algorithm model on a virtual environment. Ideally, my co-author Niall will be here to answer any questions about the animal cognition side of things, but I will do my best. So yeah, I mean, just to introduce the topic, animal psychologists, they have these associative learning theories, which they are reliable in predicting the behavior of animals, the learned behavior of animals, and crucially, they also provide experimental protocols that can serve as inspiration for developing reinforcement learning algorithms and other tasks in computer science. The problem is that translating these theories into artificial agents has proved to be non-trivial. And the core of the question that we have kept sort of going back to is this question of a stimulus, and that's why the title is "What is a Stimulus?" So these cognitive and behavioral psychologists, they often leave a stimulus object formally undefined. So their theories talk in terms of stimuli, but they don't really define it. And AI researchers like myself, we don't really think in terms of stimulus. We think more in terms of a state, which you can interpret as being the sum of all currently present stimuli in the situation. And so we've been trying to investigate and bridge this gap, and we do that by implementing this learning model that I will describe next. It's an associative learning model into the animal AI, which is our virtual environment. So a bit of background and why we even selected this learning model. It was proposed quite recently, and it kind of is an attempt to bridge the gap between animal cognition theory and machine learning. It has a very clear mathematical formulation, as you will see. For the animal psychologists, it is interesting because it combines both instrumental and Pavlovian conditioning. I will talk a bit more about that later, but Pavlovian conditioning basically is about the relationship between stimuli, and instrumental conditioning is more like reinforcement learning, where it considers the actions and the effects of those actions. And someone else has used this learning formulation in the animal AI, which is the environment the project that I'm working on has sort of developed, and they claim that this formulation is enough to pass several cognitive competencies that are relevant for animal researchers. So the learning model is quite simple to understand. I'm usually skeptical of including equations, in my slides, but these are fairly simple. Consider that you have a sequence of stimuli, and they are followed by responses or actions. So stimulus S1 followed by action R1 leads to stimulus S2, and so on. And this formulation basically sort of relates the value of a stimulus to the value of wherever comes next. So what you see here, where it has a U, it means unconditioned stimulus. Where it has a W, it means conditioned. Unconditioned stimulus means that it's like an instinctive sort of response, like food is good. That's something that all animals are born with, that notion. And then the classical experiment that was done by Pavlov of ringing a bell and then presenting a dog with food. The dog salivates at the sight of food, and then after a few trials, it will start salivating when it hears the bell. So we say that the bell stimulus has been conditioned by the presence of food afterwards. And so the first equation is related to that so-called Pavlovian conditioning, where the value of a stimulus, the conditioned value of a stimulus, depends on the unconditioned and conditioned value of the stimulus that comes next. And the second equation, is what we call instrumental conditioning, where the value of a stimulus response pair is again dependent on the unconditioned and conditioned stimulus value of whatever is coming next. So, I mean, you can see that particularly the second equation, it looks quite similar to something like Q-learning. But I guess the relevance of this model is that it combines both types of conditioning, both Pavlovian and instrumental. And then, you know, when you have learned these values, these stimulus and stimulus response values, you then select an action as a response to stimulus using a simple softmax rule. And you can have a temperature parameter here that that you can use to control, you know, exploration and exploitation regarding depending on how you're doing your training. And now I'll talk a bit about the animal AI environment, which was developed not by me, but by people who have worked in the project previously. It's a 3D sort of virtual environment. It's built in Unity, and it was built for this purpose, for training and for testing these AI agents and by simulating noisy and stochastic environments. And crucially, it is an attempt to emulate these cognitive psychology tests that the animal psychologists have been doing on animals for decades, and they have developed these protocols, and they can be quite useful for us. So this is just an example of the kind of things that you can build with the animal AI environment. The balls in the middle, those are rewards. So yellow means a non-terminating reward. Green means a terminating reward. So when you find the green reward, the experiment terminates. And the red one, as you might have guessed, is a punishing reward. Then you have, you know, this rectangle here is like lava, and then you have multiple objects that you can use to build your scenes. And this tiny guy here, I think, is the agent. And then you can build multiple scenes. And for example, if you look at this one here on the left, this transparent kind of object, one of the experiments that animal psychologists do is to see if an animal understands transparency, where you hide, where you put food within the animal's line of sight, but behind a transparent object. And they try to see if the animal understands that it has to go around the object to get the food rather than just keep, you know, not knocking on the transparent object. So that's the kind of thing that you can emulate in this virtual environment when you're testing your agents. So moving on to the implementation side of things, we started off again by trying to answer this question of what is a stimulus. And the way we decided to go about it in the beginning was, well, first of all, we're only considering visual stimuli, and we need a way to categorize whatever the agent is seeing into a stimulus. So we begin with an autoencoder, which I will explain what it's doing in a bit more detail later on. But it will suffice to say that the autoencoder is basically reconstructing the agent's visual input by first encoding it into sort of a lower dimensional representation. Then you take that encoded representation and you try and cluster similar representations into so-called stimulus categories. So it is vaguely inspired by, you know, k-means clustering, where you have a sort of a maximum number of clusters, and then you have a distance threshold. And, you know, if two visual sort of representations are quite similar, then they end up in the same cluster. If not, you know, they end up in different clusters. And then once you have defined your stimuli in this particular way, then you can just plug in those equations that I mentioned earlier, basically, and use them in your A-learning model. So this is just an example for anyone who's not familiar with what an autoencoder is and what it does. It basically just reconstructs the input. It's going to be a lossy reconstruction, obviously, because you're sort of lowering the dimension of the visual input, and then you try and see how sort of what's the minimal sort of representation that you need to have in order to to still be able to preserve some information about the scene that enables that reconstruction to occur. So in general, the way we train these agents is over a number of episodes. Each of these episodes will last a number of time steps, and the episode will end when the agent either gets a terminating reward, like a green object, or a red object, which will be a punishment in that case, or when the agent times out. If the agent is just sort of going around doing nothing, it needs to at some point it needs to time out. And there are additional yellow rewards that do not terminate the scene, which the agent can find. And I've been told I need to speed up. But what we did next was try to have an end-to-end architecture. So rather than have the two-step approach where you first train an autoencoder and then you try and cluster that into stimuli, we basically tried to learn the whole thing in one go, where you have your representation somewhere down the middle of this architecture, and then it kind of branches out. And I can go into a bit more detail during the questions because apparently I'm running out of time. But you learn both the stimulus and the stimulus response values in one go, essentially, together with learning the stimulus representation rather than being a two-step approach. And we basically compare the two approaches. So in this case, the loss function will be, so what you see in red is what the left side of this architecture is predicting. So it is predicting the stimulus value. And like I said, it has to relate to whatever comes after that, the stimulus that comes after the unconditioned and conditioned value of the next stimulus in the sequence. And the right side of this architecture is predicting the stimulus response value. So this is what is being predicted. And again, it has to approximate whatever stimulus value of what's coming next. And this is how we define the loss function in this case. So in terms of results, we looked at one experiment that was done by animal psychologists on pigeons. It's taken from this paper, the Mondragon and al. paper, where a pigeon receives a stimulus and then it has to select either left or right in order to get food. And we translated that into the animal AI environment by having a poster board that indicates where the agent should go, and then you have two pits on either side, and the agent can fall down into either pit. One of the pit will have a reward, the other will have a punishment. So this is just an example of the scene. I have a video afterwards, but yeah, so the poster board will indicate, so yellow means go left, that's where the reward is. And blue will mean go right, because that's where the reward is. And we also did it with shapes. So in terms of results, so you can see on the left the performance of the pigeons on this task. That's taken from that paper that I mentioned. And you can see on the right that actually with the first approach, the one that I mentioned that has the autoencode and then the clustering, it is actually doing as well as the pigeons, which was we were quite happy. We were quite happy with that, and that is a success rate of picking the right side and getting the reward. And here is a video of what the agent is doing. So this is while the agent is being trained. You can see that there are issues. So the pigeons can literally just move their head to the left or the right, whereas our agent needs to be able to first figure out that it has to fall down the pit, that it doesn't matter. Like you can't just knock your head against the wall because that's not going to be useful. So our agent in some ways needs to figure out more stuff than the pigeons do. So yeah, this is the example with colors, and there is a similar example. And you will notice that the agent cannot see. So underneath the pit, there is either green reward or lava. The agent cannot see it because that is on purpose. We want the only visual stimulus to be the poster board, and the agent to figure out which side it has to go to. And this is a similar one, just with shape, where the cross, I think, means you need to go left, or maybe not. And then you also have, it was to go right, and the circle means go left in order to get the reward. Now, this is the, and I cannot dwell too much on that. This is the performance with the end-to-end architecture, the second approach that I mentioned. Now, I'm a bit disappointed that it is not doing as well as the other approach. And I'm disappointed because in many ways it is a cleaner, nicer approach. But my guess is that we can discuss that during Q&A. Because this is quite similar to Q-learning. Q-learning will often assume the presence of a reward at each step. Here we have hundreds of time steps, and there is only a reward at the end. And maybe that is what is hindering training, but we can discuss that later. But yeah, so the first approach, and one of the autoencoders so far, is the one that has worked best. And yeah, so just to conclude, these associative learning theories, they explain and they predict animal learning and behavior, but there is a challenge in translating these models into, an artificial agent that can sort of actively learn and behave. And we have stumbled upon this question of clarifying what is meant by a stimulus in the interaction between the agent and the environment. So the first approach is using this clustering heuristic to categorize the visual input into a set of stimuli. And the second approach is trying to learn the stimulus together with everything else, with the stimulus values and the stimulus response values. And right now we're doing a sort of basic curriculum that mimics the home cage scenario, where an animal sort of grows and lives inside a cage and then has to do a series of tasks. And that's what the next step is. But I think I need to finish very soon. Thank you very much for listening.